back, dear friends, to our discussion on postmodernism. We are having the introductory lectures of postmodernism, and this is our third lecture on the introduction to postmodernism. Actually, I am also learning the subject with you. I wish all of you are having a joyful learning of postmodernism. Now, in our class today, we shall discuss some of the literary features of postmodernism. Literary features of postmodernism. In postmodernism, the idea of a single hero is no more there. There is no idea of a single hero. But identity becomes one of the most important themes across all these postmodern literatures. Identity. It is not a single identity that is related to a single nationality or identity that is related to a single community. It could be sexual identity, it could be local identity, it could be national identity, it could be racial identity, it could be spiritual identity, or it could be intellectual identity. So identity is an important theme of the postmodern literature. Now, when we talk about the author and the text, in modernism, there is the heroic author who creates the totalizing masterwork. There is the author, and the author creates the text in modernism. But when we come to postmodernism, the unstable text yields plural reading to the deconstructing readers. Now, there is one text and there are many readers. The interpretation depends upon the reader, not on the author. The power moves from the author to the reader. The reader becomes another creator of the text itself. So the reader is capable of giving his or her interpretations. These interpretations need not be the interpretations that the author intended. So multiple readers, multiple interpretations. The interpretations that the reader gives is acceptable and legitimate. The primacy of the author is entirely lost in the postmodern era. So the primacy of the author is completely lost. Any reader can interpret the text. The second thing that we can remember about postmodern literature is regarding complexity of communication. Complexity of communication. In modernism, the communication required three components: the author, the text, and the reader. The author, the text, and the reader. But when we come to postmodernism, this complexity of communication is broken down, and there is another kind of relationship. Every individual is both a reader and an author. Every individual is both a reader and an author. As Roland Barthes would state, the author is dead. Once the text has moved out of the author's hand, it is no longer the author's text, but the reader's text altogether. Thus, the original idea does not hold, does not stand. It transforms into a new text or new interpretation. It is no longer important for the author to give the particular interpretation. Every reader, depending upon his situation, depending upon his context, is free to interpret in many different ways. While the modernist writer lamented that the text is not available to the reader in the way that the author wanted, the postmodernist writer is celebrating the fact that many readers are accessing the text in multiple ways. So there is a difference between modernism and postmodernism. This tendency was noticeable in other forms of art as well. Other forms of art like architecture, painting, etc. There is no single truth. There is no single correctness prevailing. Each individual is free to choose his own right or his own wrong based on the context. Now, this is a liberating factor. Each individual is free to choose his own right or his own wrong truth based on the context. Such a liberating factor. There is no single truth. The author is dead. Now, concerning the worldviews, when we talk about worldviews, we can talk about the pre-modern times. In pre-modern times, the worldview is centric, pure centric world. It was a worldview dictated by the church, Catholic Church, and other similar establishments. God put it there. So pre-modern is a God-centered worldview. Pre-modern is a God-centered worldview. Now when we come to the modern times, the God-centric world is no more accepted. The God-centric worldview is not accepted. There is no longer the divine right of the kings. No dominating right of the political power or party. The individual was in focus. The individual was in focus. The progress of the individual was the main concern. That is the modern worldview. So, but when we come to postmodernism, what is a postmodern worldview? It is that the world is more chaotic. There is no possibility to have any center. There is a celebration of the anarchic practices. There is celebration of freedom and secular practices. There are many newer forms of articulations. There is a foregrounding of black writers. There is a foregrounding of women writers. There is a foregrounding of Dalit writers. Now these forms were not part of the mainstream previously. They were foregrounded now. They are foregrounded now. There is a movement away from order. There is a movement away from hierarchy. So this is the worldview, the pre-modern, modern and postmodern worldview. And when we come to the form of the literature, form in modern times, there was a proper and rigid form in place. There was a proper and rigid form in place. It was conjunctive or closed regarding form. So there was a proper form. The form has to be followed. But when we come to the postmodern times, it was more open and anti-form. There is no form. It was disjunctive and open. So closed form in modern times, open form in postmodern times. In modernism, there is the purpose of every single thing done. There is the purpose of every single thing done. But in postmodernism, there is more playfulness. It's more playful. There is another difference between modernism and postmodernism. Another literary characteristic that we can remember is that modernism relied on things by design. Things by design. But postmodernism celebrates the aspects of chance, jeopardizing many things that were central to human understanding. Another characteristic we can remember is that modernism believed in a strict sense of hierarchy, but postmodernism, it celebrated anarchy. Even in the economic scenario, there was the breaking down of hierarchy by the flattening processes. The pyramidal hierarchical order is replaced by the paradigms of flattening. So there is hierarchy in modern times. When we come to postmodern times, there is no hierarchy, there is the flattening paradigms. In modernism, the focus was on the finished art. Another characteristic we can remember. The focus is on the finished art, the finished product in modernism. But when we come to postmodernism, the focus was on the process, not on the product. The focus was on the process or performance or the happening. Enjoy the process, not the product. Don't worry about the final product, but enjoy the process. That was another change that would take place, shift that take place from modernism to postmodernism. And modernism focused on the presence, but in postmodernism, the focus was on the absence. Now all the forgotten writers, absent writers, forgotten communities, the neglected people were brought to the forefront. All that was absent will be brought to the present. It was seen not only in literature, but also in other spheres of life like politics. Another characteristic we can remember is that modernism rejected the rigid boundaries of high and low art. Rejected the boundaries of high and low art. But postmodernism also rejects the rigid boundaries between high art and low art, but it goes a step further. Postmodernism deliberately mixes low art and high art, the past with the future, one genre with another. Thus we have the light-hearted parody. The light-hearted parody also was used in the modern times as well. So there is a deliberate mixing of low art and high art in postmodernism. Another characteristic that we can remember is that modernism considered language as a rational, transparent tool to represent the reality and the activities of the rational mind. So language represents reality. Language is representative of thoughts and things, etc. Language represents the reality. Now the signifiers always point to the signified. That is a modern thinking. But when we come to postmodernism, postmodernism revolutionized the concept of language. Here, a signifier has no signified as there is no reality to signify. Language is a multi-layered medium with which we search for meaning, being aware of the impossibility of absolute knowledge. So there is a difference between modernism and postmodernism regarding the language. Both modernism and postmodernism gave voice to the insecurities, gave voices to the disorientations, gave voices to the fragmentation of the 20th century Western world. So both modernism and postmodernism, they gave voice to the fragmentation of the world. But the themes were treated differently by the two schools, modernism and postmodernism. Now, modernism will project fragmentation as tragic, something pitiable. Fragmentation is tragic. It laments the loss of unity. It laments the loss of center of life and suggests that the works of art can restore unity, the works of art can restore continuity, can restore meaning of life, etc. So there is still a hope for restoration. Thus modernism desires for order in its aesthetics. Now modernism believes that coherence and unity is possible, that emphasizing the importance of rationality and order. Modernism believes that more rationality leads to more order. Now this modernist belief in order, modernist belief in stability and unity is what the postmodernist thinker Lyotard calls a meta-narrative. Thus, modernism works through meta-narrative or grand narrative. But when we come to postmodernism, postmodernism, unlike modernism, celebrates fragmentation. Modernism lamented fragmentation, but postmodernism is celebrating fragmentation. It considers fragmentation and decenteredness as the only possible way of existence and does not try to escape from these conditions. So it celebrates fragmentation. It accepts that it is not possible to have a coherent center. While modernism works through meta-narrative, while modernism works through the grand narrative, the postmodernism questions, postmodernism deconstructs the meta-narrative, the grand narratives. Some of the basic tenets of postmodernism are: first one, constructivism. Constructivism states that everything is ideologically constructed. Everything is constructed. The media, to a great deal, is responsible for constructing our identity and everyday realities. So one of the tenets of postmodernism is constructivism. So everything is knowingly constructed. The second tenet of postmodernism is relativism. Constructivism invariably leads to relativism. Our identities are constructed and transformed every moment in relation to our environment. So relativism, constructivism, relativism, all these points we'll study in detail. The third tenet that we can learn about postmodernism or say about postmodernism is subjectivity. Objectivity does not exist. Objective reality does not exist. There is a stress on subjectivity. The stress on subjectivity will naturally lead to interest in local and specific experience rather than universal and abstract experiences. So importance is given to specific local experiences. That is known as the mini narrative. Modernism focused on the meta narrative, grand narrative. Postmodernism will focus on mini narrative. So mini narrative is another tenet of postmodernism. Mini narratives are stories that explain small practices and will explain local politics and culture than meta narrative or grand narratives. So my dear students, with this lecture I am actually closing the introductory concepts on postmodernism. We have had 3 classes. In the 3 classes I have tried to introduce to you the concept called postmodernism, and I request all of you to supplement the knowledge of this particular topic, postmodernism, by your personal reading, and we can expect one essay question from this particular part, modernism, in our university examinations. In our subsequent classes, we will try to stick on to our syllabus, and we will try to explain the different concepts that are mentioned in the syllabus, and we will conclude our postmodernism with the essay that we are supposed to learn on postmodernism. I thank all of you for your patient listening. I hope you have a joyful learning of postmodernism. Thank you for your patient listening.